Okay, so welcome everyone. Sorry for the technical delay, but we are here. I'm joining everyone today from Miramar, Florida, right outside of Miami today. So I got a couple of things doing this week. I have a one of the first official Sauce Radio events with a group called Diverse Tech. So down here, my friend Chris, who's been on the pod before, he's DJing, and so we're gonna have Sauce Radio kind of add a little extra flair to it, and so it's a tech meetup for women down here in Florida. So yeah, excited about that. And we also have
That
a
sounds
Twitch.
like a lot of fun.
Yeah, nah, it should be great. So I'm looking forward to that. And then on Saturday, there's also a Twitch event down here in Miami. So gonna try and connect with some people on Twitch. Get that platform going a little bit better. So yeah, a lot of exciting things going on this week, which leads me to the what I wanted to discuss today, and what we're gonna be talking about is business. So we're gonna be talking about it on a little bit deeper level than we're typically when we're hearing referred to business as. It kind of came to me earlier this week as I've just been thinking about some of my business ventures, some things that I had going on, what black business is. So I had a couple of questions. So I actually used I came to you with this theory as soon as I had it, or the idea. So I was like, yeah, I'm trying to talk about the etymology of business. And so it was just an idea, and I hadn't done much research with it, but I had a certain concept of it. So I shot that message over to you. I had ChatGPT do some deep research into some of my ideas, and it gave me back a lot of good information that I wanted to talk about. Um, so to kind of get started, I just wanted to ask you, when you hear the term business, what is your initial thoughts? Like what do you when someone says business, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Pe- Person to person transactions.
Okay.
So, a lot of times when we talk about business, people think of something out there.
Hmm.
However, if you're an adult and you are doing transactions with another entity, you are doing business. For an example, if you rent a home or an apartment, you're doing business with the landlord. And in the state of Georgia, if you don't satisfy your end of the agreement of the transaction, a person can find all their belongings sitting out of said abode with people rummaging through it. And so the first thing that I like people to think about is the fact that once you are doing regular transactions with another entity, you are doing business. If you have a cell phone contract, a lot of teenagers, their first ongoing business is their cell phone contract. That is if they're handling it. Of course, a lot of times it's their parents that's handling it. But for some teens, they're handling that on their own. And so, should you not make one of those monthly payments or two, folks will find out what business looks like because all of a sudden there's no service. And so for me, that's now, of course, you can almost anything. You can have a definition that is a lot more intricate, but it's as basic as I said it.
Agreed. So my initial, when I'm thinking of the term business, actually the first thing that came to my mind was like mind your own business. I think growing up, business does it is kind of, I think it's a simple enough term to where people kind of forget what the full definition is. Not saying that what you gave wasn't the full definition. I'm gonna just read what Google's definition of it is,
Sure.
just to have a baseline. So it says activities of buying or selling goods or services, or an organization that engages in such activities for profit. So as I'm we hear a lot about black owned businesses, black businesses, um, and that's almost, to me it's almost kind of become a buzzword to a sense. So many people is like, oh yeah, I have my own business, I've started a business. And I'm like, and just as I was like hearing the word consistently, I was like, well, where did the term business come from? So I was like, let me look up the etymology. And then I'm listening to it and it's like, okay, so busyness, busy, they want you to stay busy. And so I was like, okay, well, when did the term originate? And so with some research, it said that it's an old English word. Let's see, hold on, let me actually read it just so I have it on my iPad. Some of the notes that I had from ChatGPT. So it says origins is Old English, and it's evolved into modern times. Um, and the root word, where is that at? It was like biznij, I think, was the original word that it formed from. But what had me thinking when I was looking where it originated from was that the term itself originated outside of Africa. So, and that's not to say that people in Africa were not doing or conducting business. It just, those weren't the terms that were being used at that time. And so as I'm thinking about that, I'm like, okay, so there was things that were developing in the world. And if we're looking at the migration of just humans leaving Africa, a lot of information spread to other continents from Africa, but how much of that information was kind of being brought back into the continent. So that was one of the first things that I was thinking of, just the spread of knowledge, or the transfer of knowledge, and what direction it was going typically. And so that also had got me thinking was, okay, if that word developed outside of Africa, how long did it take for that term to get back to Africa for people to learn it? And then another question I had was, from people who were taken as slaves at that time, did they have enough time to learn or to understand that term in the way that it's currently used in the world today? And so from that question, I then said, okay, so if we were taken from Africa, I'm talking about black people specifically, taken from Africa without that term being ingrained in some of the people who were taken from there, and their first introduction to business was actually being a product or being enslaved, what does what is our relationship with the term business today, and as time moved forward from slavery? So it came up with some interesting things. So it was talking about, just of course, Africans um, practicing trade, and engaging in um, exchanging services for people, of course. But when I look at, I'm just getting all of my thoughts out real quick. So as I was just thinking about some of the criticisms that black businesses face in today's world, it almost seems as though black people's business practices are kind of at its infantile stages. And so as I was going through this deep research, it was kind of just taking me through a timeline of some of the things that have happened to black people since slavery, and maybe a stunted the growth of some of our business. But then when you also look at how other ethnic groups can come to America and start businesses earlier, it's due to having a much stronger foundation in business practices from years and years going back. So no matter, even if you weren't your family wasn't rich, they might have had someone who started a store, and that came passed down in habits. So just the way that I think the structure of a family business practices are passed down in that way. So I'm gonna just take a break there, kind of see what you feel about some of this information. And just one thing before, this isn't like super scholarly. This is kind of just like a free thought. We're just kind of having a conversation about something I thought was interesting. So we're in no way extreme experts on this, or so if you do know of some instances where Africans were like revolutionary in business, please let us know. So we're not saying that we're experts on this topic. We're just trying to have a nice discussion about it. So yeah, some of that, what do you think of some of that information? Because a lot of it's inferences from myself, but a little bit of research backed it up.
Yeah. So I was at a financial institution maybe about 2 months back, and I heard a story for the first time that was riveting. The banker was sharing that a lot of the black Americans who had just came out of child enslavement, they wanted to, and it's funny that we just celebrated Juneteenth, and they wanted to express their independence and try to be a part of the, the society. So somewhere along the line, they heard about banks. And just to piggyback on what you were saying in terms of being black people being novices at business, I would say that not necessarily black people in general, because business was taking place at the cradle of civilization, in the cradle of civilization, which was Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the highest level business practices was learned from African people and transported abroad. I would agree that Black American business has lagged behind, and that has to do with all the different systems of enslavement that has remained intact. Jim Crow and segregation and all these different laws, redlining, etc., designed to keep black people at bay. Well, anyway, the black Americans, fresh out of enslavement, decided, okay, we're going to take our hard-earned funds and put it in these banks. They had heard about these banks, but they didn't understand that they needed proof that they actually put those said funds in the bank. So the early banking, and this is part of the reason that even to this day, Black Americans are, it may be a part of our DNA, suspicious of banks, is because early on, when they put their money in banks, and went back for it because there wasn't any paper trail. The bank took the money and said goodbye to them. When they came back, they said, "Hey, first of all, some of these people could barely count, so they're showing up to the bank with this whatever amount of money it was."
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember, and even to this day, when I tell people that my undergraduate degree was in African American studies, people would kind of look strangely at me when I said that. And I would tell people quickly that if you want to understand American business, then there's no better way to understand American business than to understand African American, the African American experience. Because when we talk about business, chattel enslavement, that was business.
Right.
Now, if they weren't, and this is part of what sometimes get gets left out of the equation. If there were not black Africans who were complicit, who were agreeable to trading their brothers and sisters as chattel, then the slave trade could have never went down. The slave trade happened because you had black people who were willing to compromise their brothers and sisters for whatever gain they were getting. So business in and of itself, and it's funny. Now, I do need to make this disclaimer. I do have some expertise in business at an MBA,
Mm-hmm.
but I want to keep this as basic as possible. So black people in America becoming the property of people from all over Europe, they are the reason why so many of these families to this day have the advantage that they have. Now, business in and of itself, this is what I was going to say. Then I'm going to pause. Business in and of itself is neither positive or negative. It's just a matter of entities deciding to conduct transactions
Mm-hmm.
with one another. However, if you pay close attention to the way that the business person is portrayed in popular culture in this country, it's there's often a negative portrayal of the business person, and there's a reason for that because the people who want to portray the business person in a negative light is to try to discourage people like you and I from getting involved in business because there's a lot of advantages in getting involved in commerce outside of just handling your basic necessities. Because again, I started this conversation by saying that we all do business when we pay our mortgage, we pay our rent, we pay our electric bill, but that's just the basics. The people who are really running the world, they're operating a business on another level. However, popular media, which is run by those and owned by those people who are doing business on another level, they make they give us the impression that we don't want to get in business while they run everything doing business on
Mm-hmm.
a high level. So
Yeah. No, the when I think of how, like, I guess if we move to America at this time point in the time period. I think that's another place where black people in general fell behind another step, because at that point we really had no capital to practice the Western form of business. And maybe the term I should have looked up was capitalism as opposed to business, because I think that, yeah, business happens all the time, but the type of business that's going on in the West in comparison to what was probably going on in Africa probably vastly different. And that's more where I'm saying I don't know if we were just due to the lack of educational opportunities that black people had growing up in slavery or coming up in slavery, the lack of opportunities that they would have to understand, actually practice some of these concepts in real time. The research I did say, certain slaves would, create or, farm extra scraps and, sell them to other slaves. Well, really trade, because they didn't have any actual currency. They were talking about some slaves who got skills and were able to shop out their skill sets to other slave owners, where the slave owner themselves would be paid directly, but sometimes the slave could keep a little portion for themselves. And in some rare cases, they'd make enough to, possibly buy themselves freedom. But yeah, when I think of it as just in terms of generational information being passed down, there's a very big gap for black people. And once emancipation happened, there really wasn't any direct direct education on how to participate in this system, and it was kind of more just being figured out as we went, along with being hit with other racial prejudices, such as like Jim Crow, or once segregation ended, integration hurting black businesses as well. So there was a couple of things. Just, and I guess we'll kind of just walk through the whole timeline of black business being developed. So from the slave, from being property to being the actual capital, to now turning into citizens who are able to legally earn capital. We also suffered from only having a small group to market to, because no other races would purchase from us. So, and I think that's still something that's prevalent today when we see a lot of black business. Their only consumer base is black people, which is, it's not the smallest market group, but when you're thinking of black people who want to buy from black people, then that customer group gets a lot smaller. And so it's like we didn't have a lot of opportunities to set up new things within America that was kind of our bread and butter outside. Because I know people, even after we were emancipated, a lot of people still continue to work on plantations as sharecroppers, things of that nature. So I think that's always been something that's kind of hurting our expansion as business owners when we're looking at where we're currently at today. Let me pull up some things. After emancipation, yeah, they had. So then, of course, we had a couple of well-known, Madam C.J. Walker, who was the first. They had some black banks that opened up eventually, mainly out of necessity, because they couldn't get loans, they couldn't get insurance. So it's just like at every step of the way, there was massive hurdles that we had no assistance getting over, um, through our come up over the years. And then once we got some, I normally have the Black Wall Street sign or a poster in the back of me, but that once that was burned down, that's really another massive blow to just black businesses, because that one had over 100 something businesses there. I want to say 140. These notes are all over. I should have had the condensed version. I'm trying to find my place here, but yeah, we lost so many major businesses at that point, and never really had a chance to kind of recover from that. And I know people talk about that all the time, but I don't think we ever really think about the full consequences of losing something that massive. Because they said outside of the emancipation, over 1,000 black businesses, small black businesses, it started up, and it was a necessity because black people couldn't buy from anybody else. And then the burning down of Black Wall Street, and then integration, where now you can buy from anybody. You're not just restricted to buying from black people. That also killed a lot of the momentum of black businesses growing at that time. So it's facing a whole lot of uphill battles up until that point. And if you want to say something about that right now, because I'm gonna try and find where we're in the we'll start it back at like the mid 20th century, in terms like around civil rights movement and how that kind of had to do with business.
Yeah. Hold on 1 second. There's some background noise I need to
Okay.
deal with. So there's so many different tentacles to what you were talking about. Now, if you listen to a lot of people, particularly black people, capitalism in and of itself is the devil. And capitalism is, again, at its fundamental level, is a system that is designed to allow a person who creates a product to benefit as much as they possibly can and want to from creating that product, as much as the free market will allow them to. Whereas with those other structure like socialism, now we're talking less about the free market, and we're talking about the government controlling the mode of production and deciding that, okay, we're going to put a cap on the amount you're going to make because we want to make sure that the government is good. And and so in our system, as a result of the taxes we pay, allegedly, that's how we make sure that the government is good. So capitalists make as much as they possibly can make, and then the government gets taken care of through taxes in the capitalist system. Now, part of what has made the Black American experience so challenging again is that honestly, up until as far as presidents and systems, up until Richard Nixon, of all people, there wasn't really any true championing of black business. And one of the things that Nixon should be given credit for is the things that he put in place to support the black business and give the black businessman a hand up. In fact, Sammy Davis Jr. got in a lot of trouble for supporting Nixon because of the promises that Nixon had made towards Sammy, a black business person, and black business people in general. I heard Dr. Claude Anderson teach on Black Friday, and I mentioned Black Friday on this platform before. So even to this day, black people still get really excited about Black Friday. But Black Friday was created as a way to extract the little bit of funds that the newly freed Black Americans had back into popular business. So they created Black Friday as a bazaar where you can get all this stuff for on the cheap as a way to extract the funds that Black Americans have.
Mm-hmm.
And I just in getting ready for this session, I came across something by Dr. Boyce Watkins, who does a lot for Black wealth and teaches a lot on Black wealth, and he's intimately tied with Dr. Claude Anderson.
Mm-hmm.
It probably was on one of his programs that I heard Dr. Anderson talk about Black Friday. You and I have talked about the role of hip hop quite a bit. Obviously, We the Sauce is a great way for people to be exposed to hip hop all over the United States and music from around the world. However, in this piece that Dr. Boyce Watkins recently did, he talks about how hip hop, again, a lot of the people in the high echelon of hip hop, the executives, many of the executives are not Black Americans. The face of hip hop is clearly Black American, but many of the executives are not Black Americans. And so hip hop in its messaging is often used to extract Black wealth,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and pap it throughout. You know, you have all of these brands that are constantly being propped up. Most of those brands that are propped up by hip hop are not brands that are owned by Black people. And even one of hip hop's biggest and brightest stars, he's in jail. Well, I came across something that yesterday that said the charges were dropped uh, against Diddy. I didn't follow
Most,
the story
a
closely.
lot of them,
Yeah,
not all of them, I
yeah,
don't believe. Mm-hmm.
yeah. But anyway, by now many people have heard that part of Diddy's downfall was him pushing back on the beverage executives who were taking the lion's share of the funds that he was generating through his brand.
Mm-hmm.
And so, to make a long to make a long story short, um, I don't know if you spoke to this or I saw this in the notes that you provided. Some people some people question the value of desegregation on black business because through the mass desegregation that took place, it opened up the dissolution of black business because now that money that was created in Black Wall Street or created in Auburn Avenue and here in Atlanta, now it was desegregation was a way to disperse that income that income all over the place. And I'm going to tell you something as a black business owner, I've seen where all the rhetoric around, you know, uh, Trump being this and that, and the boycotts that are going on, targeting quote unquote white established businesses, there are a lot of white people who have retaliated and have been very intentional about not doing business with black people. So one of the things, and I'm glad that you decided to broach this conversation, because one of the things that often doesn't happen is that when people come up with ideas, whether it be to boycott this or boycott that, sometimes those ideas are not thought through well enough. Now, to their credit, the one thing that I know after studying Dr. King quite a bit was that they met constantly and they put a lot of thought and expertise into whatever boycott that they were doing, because they were trying to look at it in terms of its wide ranging effect on not only their target, that target company, but on the people that they were said to be trying to help. And I'm going to say this, make this last statement, and then I'm going to be quiet because I can really go on almost any of these topics. So one of the pushbacks that Dr. Umar, who Dr. Umar is a Pan Africanist to his core.
Hmm.
What does he call himself? King Kong of Black.
King Kong consciousness.
But one of the pushbacks that he was sharing, he had a good point, and I think it's worth bringing up. He said that he gave the utmost respect for Dr. Bryant taking the steps that he took to push back on Target and uh, a few other companies that weren't doing right by black people. However, as a part of the negotiation that took place, another company was, which is dominant culture owned, was given the green light for black people to go to. So Dr. Umar's recant was, why wasn't the solution to create a black focused business that people could go to and do business with? Um, I think that more conversation needs to be held across the board between the pure integrationist capitalists, the black Pan Africanists, and the challenge is often getting these different viewpoints in the same room, because usually one side has this opinion, the other side has another opinion, and there's been a lot of name calling that's taking place.
Yeah.
And because of all that name calling, now it's personal. So you can't get them in the room having a conversation. So maybe, and that's why I appreciate the approach that Dr. Umar took with talking about the situation with Dr. Bryant, because there wasn't any name calling or anything. It was just an observation that was made.
Hmm.
Uh, these these are going to be tricky times because, in terms of the politics that's going on, the resegregation of the dollar that we're seeing, uh, we're going to have to put our heads together very quickly.
I agree. And yeah, with you mentioning Nixon as being like the first time that so from emancipation to like 1970 or 1969, I think that might have been when that initiative started. There was no plans on helping black people get into this economic system. So if you think 50 years was the first time they even attempted to help people get into or help black people get into the economy in a real way where we're not being
Right.
marginalized at every step, you can think we're only 50 years into this. So that's telling right there.
And interesting, I apologize for cutting you off,
No, go for
but you know what's interesting about what you just said?
it.
He was the first person that attempted to do something to help, specifically help black business, and they ran him off. I mean, there's no irony to it. Now, of course, as far as we know, and according to what we're told, he broke into this, and
Mm-hmm.
he got caught and all that kind of stuff. But here's the thing: he's not the only president that did something foul, but he's the one that they ran off.
Mm. Yeah, when you put two and two together, it does. It's a little strange. So yeah, that's a interesting connection that I hadn't made either. Um, but also around that time, I think around that time we got our first. Let me just read off some of these facts. I think we had the first. So by the 1970s and 1980s, we see slow but steady integration of African Americans into corporate America and the rise of large black owned enterprises. So, the first black CEO of a Fortune 500 company was Clifton R. Wharton Jr., and he was appointed in the 1980s as head of TIAA CREF. I don't exactly know what that is. And then we had 1983 entrepreneur Reginald F. Lewis made headlines by acquiring um, Patrice International Food, and I think he might have been the first black billionaire. And then we had John H. Johnson, founder of Ebony and Jet magazine, then later R.L. Johnson for BET. And so what that kind of showed me, and then of course earlier we had Madam C.J. Walker. So as I was getting to that point in the research, I'm like, some of the first places where black people saw success was in beauty or hair care and entertainment, and those are where we spend and generate some of the most. I think, yeah, in both cases for black communities, when you think about hairdressers and barbers, that's some of the biggest markets that we have within the black community. And then entertainment, whether it's rappers or basketball players, it's like those are still some of the um, places where we're kind of most prevalent in terms of making our money. So I found that was pretty interesting as well. And then yeah, it kind of goes on to just talk about the loss of the black movie theaters and things like that when segregation came, or when desegregation came around. Um, but yeah, it takes us to, hold on, took powerful black man.
And while you're looking at that, I just wanted to comment on the point that you just made, which is really powerful. Of course, I can't prove this, but because we black people are such heavy consumers of beauty products, if you recall, Chris Rock made I thought a very important film. I forget the title of it.
Good hair?
About
Was it Good Hair?
Good Hair. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's called. I think it was called Good Hair. It was a very important film, and he was seeking to, in his own way, make some commentary on the fact that we, and I, of course, he subsequently talked about this, but perhaps the real reason Chris got the fire slapped out of him is because that was the way the powers that be let him know, hey, you better knock it off. Don't make anything else like that again.
Yeah, that's that's how like got a funny way of things happening later on. Yeah. Or it's that helping black people karma. That might be what we gotta call it. um No, there was one statistic though that especially ties into a lot of what we're talking about. I'm trying to find it. It was a study by UNLV, and the numbers that they gave me kind of made me sick. I'm trying to find it exactly. Okay, yeah. So additionally, surveys indicated that the financial literacy and exposure to business education have lagged in the black population due to historical inadequacies in education. A recent study found that 82% of young African Americans ages 18 to 30 interested in entrepreneurship lacked basic financial literacy for awareness of credit score, loan requirements, etc. And this knowledge deficit, while not unique to black youth, is more pronounced compared to whites. I'm gonna pull up the actual UNLV. So this was University of Las Vegas, Nevada, Las Vegas, and so that information had really shocked me. So 82% of people who are actually ambitious enough to want to be entrepreneurs. So not even out of the whole people who actually wanted to be entrepreneurs, 82% didn't know. So only what 18% of people had the adequate information or financial literacy to understand how a business worked, and out of that 18%, how many of them are going to be successful? So those numbers just kind of took me back for a second, just thinking that it's really that bad. Hold on, let me read some of these other. I'm gonna just read this section real quick. So minimum year. Okay, so and the knowledge of one's own credit score, basic knowledge of the Minority Business Development Agency or Small Business Administrations, and knowledge of minimum years of operation typically required for a business owner to apply for a small business loan for traditional banks. Securing startup capital requires an understanding of factors lenders use to evaluate an individual's credit worthiness. Our research supports other key studies which shows that this knowledge deficit isn't unique to black youth. However, according to the Financial Literacy and Wellness Among African Americans reports, African Americans' financial literacy lags behind that of whites. On average, African Americans responded correctly to 38% of the personal finance index questions correctly, while white responded correctly to 55% of the same questions.
So let me ask you this. Of course, I'm in this field, so I've had a lot of opportunities to think about it. And some of this stuff I've actually written papers and stuff about.
Mm.
Let me ask you, why do you think in today's America, because I'm apparently this study is not something from 1962.
Mm.
This is a recent study, right? So why in present day America, where people have access to so much information, why the disparity? What do you think is going on?
Yeah. So just real quick, this study is from 2020, so it's a little older, but still pretty modern. Um, what do I think is the problem? I mean, I think that's what I was trying to figure out when I was asking the question. I was like, why are we so behind? Because you can I mean, it was shocking to see the numbers, but it's not shocking in reality because I know a lot of people who aren't necessarily fully financially literate and to that degree to where I think they would be able to run a successful business. Um, but I think it has to do with I want to stay away from saying it's cultural because I think it's a lack of understanding of business practices, which does means cultural, but I'm not attributing it to the actual culture. I think that coming up with that missing piece or that foundational understanding of how to or passing down businesses, understanding how to um, only knowing how to generate capital for the past 50 years or only being kind of invited to participate in the economy 50 years ago. I think that's a huge reason because that means a lot of people, you were just born when we were able to actually start getting into the economy. So I think it's a lack of maturity on our business practices because when I see like when I think of our role models for business, some of our only examples is drug dealing in a sense, and it's like when you think about it, it's the only capital that was readily available that everyone wanted to buy, not just people in your community. I mean, a lot of people do sell directly to their community, but that's something that isn't universal to just the black community. You can sell that to anyone, and so then sometimes that will give you access to people who had more capital than you were typically accustomed to seeing. And those people who were introduced to those people kind of had some other opportunities to find out other occupations, other ways to make money, illegal or legal. Still just different opportunities that the a person who isn't touching those types of funds wouldn't know is even a possibility. So I think it's almost like now everything is kind of being hidden in plain sight. So it's like, yeah, all this information is out there, but if the people don't believe that they're able to obtain it, then they don't even try to get it. So that would be one of the only real reasons I could think of off of the top of my head.
Well, you gave a few different reasons. You talked about role modeling. I know, and you sharing your own story. If I'm not mistaken, your own dad is in technology in some facet, and
Hmm.
so it's not a coincidence. You're in technology,
Right.
and so for a lot of Black Americans, of course, the institutions. Dr. Francis Cress Welsing says the institution of white supremacy was designed to keep a particular pattern going.
Hmm.
And so a lot of young Black Americans didn't see a business person or someone being successful in business. Now, the people that they see with a lot of stuff, primarily in popular culture, are in entertainment or sports.
Hmm.
You and I both know that you've got a small window of people, especially in sports, that are going to be successful on that level. And I think this is the biggest challenge of them all. In many ways, and we talked about this on the show, in many ways, because people have answers at their fingertips, chat GPT,
Hmm.
Google. Sometimes people think that they can access the answer for anything by just picking up their phone. But when it comes to running a sophisticated business over time, you don't need an answer, you need answers, plural. So what I'm saying is that for a lot of our young people, they've been hoodwinked, they've been bamboozled into only applying this amount of effort towards their success, even in sports and entertainment, even in those areas that they say they want to get into. I mean, you through Weeder Source, you're in that entertainment space, and I've heard you speak to how much work you've had to put in, sweat equity you have to put in to build your brand. And I think that because for a lot of our people, they haven't had the proper model of seeing people hustle for their own thing, they don't understand how to hustle for their own thing. What they're clear about is that they're not going to work the way that they see their parents work, because in many cases they see their parents working two or three jobs and they'll tell you right away, I'm not doing that. But then on the other hand, going back to your original statement of people saying, oh, I got my own business, they're not doing enough to understand what it takes to actually run their own business. And that's where the failure
Mm-hmm.
comes in. They're running this real surface thing. And even then, I mean, and I've talked about this before, there's a lot of glorification of the street game, but there's only a small percentage of cats that are doing big numbers in the streets, because it takes a lot of sophistication to do the street game on the highest level.
Right. Really does. And actually, that kind of brings me to when we're talking about black business. And when I was just looking up the etymology of the word and just thinking about busy, it's like instead of minding your own business, you have to monetize your business, or monetize your busyness. So everyone has their own personal business that they're going on. A lot of times it's just not monetized, and I think that's something that we have to get a lot better at as black people in general, just being able to see the opportunities, things that we do on a daily basis, but just kind of think of it from more of a monetization perspective in order to really start to compete in this economy. Because even I look at a lot of people like on TikTok, people talking about their experience in corporate. There's a lot of layoffs going on, and I see a I wouldn't say a pattern, but I see black professionals having similar gripes about the work environment and kind of what's expected of them. In certain cases, I'm like, you have to work in an actual corporate office in order to understand what's expected of you. So a lot of people who are just getting there for the first time are very confused. I can tell you, I've worked the blue collar to the white collar jobs, and it gets more confusing. And I was always like, oh, I'm doing a lot less physical work, so the white collar was always like, okay, this is cool. Well, I guess you could. Software development, I think, is kind of on the line. It's kind of like a gray collar job. It's not all the way white collar to that degree, but close enough to where you're in an office in a cubicle. But it's it the principles that can apply to like a physical job like construction don't necessarily apply to corporate. And the thing I've noticed is a lot of corporate positions are busy work. So like you're really, they're just making sure that you're staying busy. It doesn't not matter if you're not working on anything particularly important. The thing is to stay busy. And whether that means creating your own work or reworking something. And a lot of times people are just pretending to be busy, so that's something that you kind of realize as you go through the workforce as well. And it becomes hard to balance, especially when you're used to doing real work that has like, I don't know, like if you're working on a house or something, if a wall gets built, then you can see progression. But if you're working on if you're testing software, how do you prove that you're staying busy? Like, I mean, you have the test results, but if you only have one test to run for that day, how do you now fill up the rest of those 8 hours by being busy? So I think that's another. I think that's the part that black people are still trying to figure out, is because a lot of these companies will charge a lot of money for the time, even though the task might not take um it might not take 100 hours to do. The task might only take 50 hours to do, but they're charging 100 hours for it. um I think that's part of where some of the disconnect is, um when we're thinking about monetizing our services, because even when I'm thinking about things that I have to charge other people for, you have to you have to just realize that you're not going to be taking home 100% of that money that you charge for. So if you think that you need a minimum of $100, let's say, just to do a job for somebody, if you charge that person $100, then you're only getting $35 in your pocket, most likely, because you have to pay taxes for one, you have to invest back into your business, and then technically you don't, at that point you haven't even set a salary out for yourself. So now you have to figure out from the profit that's left over how much of that you pay yourself. So now if you felt like you deserved $100 for that and you charge that $100, now you're really only getting 25. So you have to include tax, you have to include um expenses paid for whatever services you have to do. And because I see a lot of especially people who do hair and stuff, like a lot of people have a hard time saving their time there. And it's like, it's some people don't want to pay a high price for the hair, but I tell a lot of stylists, like, you have to also protect your time, because if you're giving your services away, if you doing a head um for $100 and that style is taking you 3 to 4 hours, now you really just ended up, you went from $100 an hour to $25 an hour, and that's not even all profit for you. So just certain business practices that I think being new into, like say that you had your grandmother was a hairstylist and now you'd have a much better understanding of what goes into that, how much to charge, how to retain clients and things like that. But so many people are starting first generation hairstylists and just taking what they've seen on YouTube, and then sometimes they might start off overcharging, or they might understand that they need $100, so they charging 500. But then people are like, well, if you're brand new, why would I pay you $500? So I think that's another kind of sticky situation people get in when they're starting businesses, just in general.
As you were talking, I thought about how a connection that this conversation has to the previous conversation that we were talking about as we were seeking to help people to experience peace. And first of all, let me say this: one of the most important business voices that we have in our generation, and I don't know that he categorizes himself as a black business thinker. He happens to be black. I'm sure you've heard of him, Myron Golden. He's a he's a tremendous business mind, very important. And for the first time, as I often like to call myself as a church boy, one of the things that I think is problematic about this generation, and I'm not, when I say this generation, I'm not picking on Z, Alpha. I'm talking about all the people in this current time.
Hmm.
What's one of the things that I find to be the most challenging is that Yahweh says he will not have any idol gods before him. And what I found is that for the first time amongst a lot of black folks, there's a lot of people who don't ascribe to God. They just do them, you know. They see God as this thing that's out there. But as I was saying in our last conversation, we all of us, we have a God space. And most people, whether they realize it or not, they spend their whole life trying to fill that space up. Now, when we talk about financial security and doing business, who better than our manufacturer than to guide us to our success in whatever business we're supposed to be in? Now, we spend a lot of time talking about chattel enslavement and all that is wrought for black folks here in America.
Hmm.
But there's hardly a conversation that we've had that I haven't brought up Apostle Farrakhan because he's for 50 years he's been talking about a reckoning. And now indirectly there are others who are agreeing. Now, again, I say indirectly, not necessarily agreeing to everything that Apostle Farrakhan has ever said, but agreeing to this reckoning piece because the apostle that speaks most directly to me, Apostle Dollar, he was sharing recently that systems are failing all over the world. And so, if that's true, my biggest recommendation to black folks goes back to what I was talking about in the last session. If you want to be successful in business, then and you want to see yourself being whole in business, because let's face it, what use is it to have millions and millions of dollars? And as I heard Apostle Dollar say recently, have all of those dollars and have no one want to be around you because you're a narcissist or people hate you. That's that. There's nothing whole about that. You're a fool with a whole lot of money. And so, since we see that systems are failing, then this is the time for you to get into your God space so you can figure out what is going to be your solution as these systems continue to fail. We know they're failing because we're hearing about wars and rumors of wars all over the place. We just we just saw drop bombs drop Israel, Iran. Right now, India and Pakistan are at each other.
Hmm.
You know, the Ukraine and Russia have been at each other. China's at, um, I forget who China's at right now. And so, why am I? What does that have to do with this whole conversation? Because with all of this stuff going on, people have to make a decision. Okay, what change am I going to make so that I can figure out how to make it Because if Dr. Frances Cress Singh was right, she said that the system of white supremacy was all about the survival of a group that felt like they were going to become extinct. Okay. If that's true, then that group is absolutely afraid of what PE talked about, fear of a black planet. So every black American has to say, okay, I just heard a lot. And even if I don't subscribe to the which part of it do you subscribe to? Because the problem is that there's some people they don't subscribe to anything. They're just existing.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't figured out how they're going to do their part to participate. One of the people that I'm always bigging up is Percy Miller, Master P, because here's somebody who was in the game, who was in hip hop, an executive in hip hop, still is an executive in hip hop, and he's been on a financial literacy crusade. And so there are significant teachers out there. I've been teaching this stuff for quite a bit. Boyce Watkins. The information is out there, but there's no reason for that stat that you read a while ago for the numbers to be as crooked as they are. People just have to make a decision. Right now, people are choosing. I'm just go put it out there. People are choosing leisure that they can't afford.
Trying to live the American dream. I mean, they're being sold something that's, I wouldn't say unobtainable, but just well, yeah, pretty unobtainable, unrealistic. It's being sold a lifestyle that's unrealistic.
It's unrealistic if you're not doing what's necessary. And we realize that there's obstacles, but guess what? Read the story of Frederick Douglass. Because if you take the time to read the story of Frederick Douglass, you're talking about somebody who dealt with hellacious odds. And the fact that he was able to write a book as an ex enslaved person and do the things that he did, he recognized that there was a clear cut system designed against him. And he put his mind to work to figure out how he was going to come up out of that system. And really, at the end of the day, that's the bottom line. That's the bottom line. If Frederick Douglass can become somebody, come on.
It's possible for anyone. I think
Yeah, it's possible.
everything possible, and I think, yeah, I think that'll probably be a good stopping point. I know you got a hard stop tonight. Yeah, everyone. I think last remarks is we still have a long way to go in terms of understanding how we fit into this melting pot of America, and we have to make sure that we are doing everything within our power to educate ourselves and the people we care about, so we're able to survive and continue to pass things down. Start to develop. We don't have the greatest business practices right now, and it's on our shoulders to develop them properly so we can pass them down to the next generation, so we can make things go much further. So, but it's gonna be a group effort. Those numbers are terrible right now, and we need to. That's something that needs to be addressed immediately if we want to stand a chance. Because 83% of just the people who are ambitious enough. So technically, that might be. I'll be assuming 90% of black people, aren't financially literate enough to do some of the things that we need to do as a people. So, but that's part of why we come have these discussions, um, time and time again. And sometimes it may seem like we harp. Well, I don't think anyone thinks we harp too much on financial literacy, even though that takes up a bulk of what we typically talk about. I think that's one of the most important things. I think the music doesn't matter if we're not financially secure. Um, the relationships don't matter if we're not financially secure. So there's just so many things that are um, really leaning on the fact that we need to get more financially educated about ourselves. So, like I said, I think that's a good place to stop. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Yeah, you had any last words, Frank?
Yes, I want to echo your thanks to those people who do watch on the platforms. And if you're not watching live, you go back and watch it later. That's cool. Like and share, subscribe, all of that. Because let me say this, you know, um, as I said before, I do this because I get in my God space and I believe I'm supposed to. Here's the thing: some of the people who are supposed to hear this out of their own neglect and sloth, when you don't get this information, whether it be by me or there's a lot of people spitting the knowledge, and you find yourself super stuck. This whole thing about being entitled and somebody's going to hand you exactly what you need to get on the other side, that's going away. That you got to do your part. No, nowhere. I mean, even if we're going to go way back, we go to the cultures in the East. The cultures in the East, they teach that everybody has to do their part. So this idea where there's this system, and not to reopen the whole conversation, but there's this system, welfare system, that's going to fill in the gap where the effort wasn't applied. You, it's not going to happen. It's going away.
Yeah. That was gonna be something I was gonna pull up or bring up too. But yeah, let's not get into that. My last thing would be, yeah, everyone, don't just mind your own business, monetize your business in
That's
some
a good stuff.
capacity. Monetize your busyness. So if you're someone who's always busy, make sure that you are making some money from being busy in whatever way you can. Legal, any legal way that you can. So that'll be all from us today. Like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we will talk to you guys in 2 weeks.
Peace.